Bourbon has to be made in Kentucky. It's one of the most repeated myths in whiskey conversations, but it's got no legal truth to back it up. People hear Kentucky bourbon so often they assume it's the only kind that counts. But the actual federal rules don't tie bourbon to any specific state. The truth is, bourbon can be made anywhere in the United States. The law just says it has to be produced in the U.S., not in Kentucky, not in Bourbon County, and not anywhere near a horse. Kentucky's role is more historical and economic than legal. Sure, they make a massive percentage of the bourbon sold today, and yeah, they've got the limestone water, the warehouses, and a whole economy around it. But distilleries in New York, Texas, Indiana, Colorado, and everywhere else are making bourbon too, and it's just as real. If it meets the mash bill, barrel, proof, and aging rules, it qualifies, regardless of the zip code. So next time someone acts like a non-Kentucky bourbon is fake, you can smile politely and sip your non-fictional pour. It's still bourbon, legally and officially. Bourbon must be aged for years to be bourbon. This one gets tossed around like it's written in stone, but there's no minimum age requirement to legally call something bourbon. It just has to be stored in new charred oak containers. That's it. If a distillery wants to label it as straight bourbon, then yes, they'll need at least 2 years in the barrel and a few other things. But the base term bourbon, zero aging minimum, it could spend a few months in the barrel and still qualify as long as it meets all the other standards. People confuse aging time with quality, but those are two different conversations. Some brands push younger bourbon that still hits hard with flavor, and others wait it out for complexity. But age alone doesn't crown it bourbon royalty. Straight bourbon is a specific category, not a requirement for entry. So next time someone scoffs at a bottle like it hasn't earned its stripes, remind them the stripes come from the rules, not the calendar. Bourbon earns its name through process, not years collecting dust in a warehouse. If it doesn't say an age, it must be young. That logic sounds solid, but it collapses fast when you check the labeling laws. Under federal regulations, any bourbon under 4 years old has to declare its age on the bottle. If there's no age listed, that usually means it's at least 4 years old. Not 12, not ancient, but not some rushed batch either. There are exceptions, like blends with components of different ages, but generally speaking, no age statement means it passed the 4-year mark. People tend to think an age label means something rare, but the lack of one doesn't mean the whiskey just graduated from distillation kindergarten. Age statements are often marketing choices just as much as legal ones. Some producers skip them because they want flexibility in their blends, or because the age doesn't define the taste. Others love to slap a number on it and make it feel exclusive. But just because a label's not bragging about age doesn't mean it's immature bourbon. Sometimes silence on the bottle just means it followed the rules quietly and still came out ready to drink. All bourbon is straight bourbon. That's like saying all coffee is espresso. It sounds confident, but it's wrong. Bourbon and straight bourbon aren't interchangeable terms. Straight bourbon is a more specific category that comes with extra rules. It has to be aged at least 2 years in new charred oak, and if it's under 4, it has to tell you that. It also can't have any added coloring, flavoring, or blending with other spirits. Regular bourbon, on the other hand, still has to follow the basic identity laws, the mash bill, the distillation proof, the barrel requirements. But it doesn't have to meet those extra aging or labeling conditions. So a bottle can legally say bourbon without being straight bourbon, and there's nothing shady about that. It just means it might be younger, or maybe it doesn't meet the straight labeling criteria for another reason. So if a bottle skips the word straight, it doesn't mean it failed a test. It means it belongs to a different slice of the bourbon pie. Still legal, still regulated, and still bourbon. Just not the straight-laced version with all the bonus qualifications. Bourbon can contain caramel color or flavoring, like other whiskeys. That might fly elsewhere, but not here. Federal standards say bourbon must not contain any added coloring or flavoring. That includes caramel color, artificial flavors, and anything used to prop up or tweak the final taste. Everything you're tasting has to come from the ingredients in the barrel. The law is pretty strict about it. Straight bourbon has even tighter rules, just in case you were hoping someone snuck a little vanilla extract in there for fun. If a bottle's claiming to be bourbon but it tastes oddly candy-coated or flavored, odds are high it's either a flavored whiskey or something that doesn't meet the legal standards. Bourbon's dark, rich color and layered taste are from the charred new oak, not a squirt of food dye. You want flavor? That barrel's doing all the heavy lifting. So no, bourbon isn't allowed to cheat. It's one of the few spirits in the lineup that has to be as real as the barrel it slept in. No magic dust, no color shortcuts, just honest whiskey law doing its job. In sour mash means the bourbon tastes sour. That interpretation's about as helpful as saying hot dog is made from spicy canines. Sour mash has nothing to do with the flavor. It's a method used during fermentation. Distillers take part of the spent mash from a previous batch and mix it into the new batch. Why? To stabilize the pH, help the yeast behave, and make sure things stay consistent between batches. It's like recycling, but for whiskey microbes. The result isn't sour tasting, it's more controlled. It helps prevent unwanted bacteria from crashing the party and ruining the batch. Loads of bourbons use the sour mash process without ever advertising it. When it does show up on the label, it's usually just a nod to tradition, not a flavor warning. So if you see sour mash and expect a face-puckering bourbon, you're in for a shock. It'll taste like bourbon, not lemon juice. The term might sound funky, but it's just part of how they keep quality consistent. The only thing sour is the misunderstanding, not the whiskey. And that's a relief for everyone's palate. Bourbon can be distilled super high and still be bourbon, not even close. The distillation process has strict boundaries, and one of the biggest is proof. To legally count as bourbon, it can't be distilled above 160 proof. That's not a random number. It's designed to make sure enough of the grain character actually survives the distillation. Go higher than that, and you're stripping out too much of what makes bourbon. Bourbon! You're getting closer to vodka territory. Bourbon needs to keep some of that grainy soul intact, and that's why the limit matters. It's a big reason why different distilleries can produce such varied results, even when using similar ingredients. The distillation proof sets the stage for the barrel to work its magic. Raise that number too high, and the barrel's just flavoring a neutral spirit. Stick to the legal ceiling, and the whiskey keeps its identity. So, no, you can't just crank up the distillation and still call it bourbon. That number's baked into the law for a reason, and it's part of what gives bourbon its signature character and depth. Entry proof doesn't matter. Proofing is just marketing. Not quite. Bourbon law cares deeply about what proof the spirit enters the barrel. The legal maximum is 125 proof. Anything higher, and it stops being bourbon. That number affects the final taste more than people realize. Higher entry proof can pull out different flavors from the wood, sometimes sharper ones, while lower proof usually leads to softer, richer notes. The proof entering the barrel isn't just about alcohol content. It shapes how the spirit and wood interact. This part of the process can have long-term effects on the bourbon's body, aroma, and finish. Some distillers go in at lower proof on purpose to get more nuanced results, but everyone's still playing under the 125 ceiling. So no, entry proof isn't a marketing afterthought. It's legally enforced and flavor critical. Messing with that number means stepping outside the bourbon rules entirely. If you want to make bourbon, that barrel's getting filled under strict proof limits. No exceptions, no spin, no cheat codes. That's the real science behind that seemingly boring number on your distillery's spec sheet. Bourbon can be aged in any oak barrel as long as it's oak. That sounds like a shortcut someone made up after glancing at a tree. The truth is, bourbon must be aged in new charred oak containers. That word new matters. Used barrels aren't allowed. Doesn't matter if it held wine, rum, or the finest unicorn tears, it's got to be fresh wood. Charred too, because the heat treatment helps release compounds in the oak that create bourbon's signature flavors and that beautiful amber color. Without the char, you're basically soaking grain alcohol in wood soup. The requirement doesn't even technically say barrel, it says container. But good luck finding a distillery aging bourbon in anything other than a barrel. Used oak gets plenty of love in other spirits, but for bourbon, it's a no-go. So if someone tells you it's fine to reuse a barrel because it's still oak, they're missing the entire point. Bourbon's identity is rooted in its contact with that brand new, freshly charred oak. That's not tradition, it's law. No shortcuts, no recycling, just one chance to make that wood count. Bourbon must be barrel-aged in a rickhouse in Kentucky climate to count. This is one of those ideas that sounds like gospel, until you remember bourbon has federal, not regional, rules. There's no mention of Kentucky, rickhouses, or any specific climate in the legal standards. Bourbon just has to be made in the United States and meet its core production requirements. A rickhouse is a traditional storage building with specific airflow and temperature swings, and yes, Kentucky's climate helps push the liquid in and out of the wood. But that's not a legal box to check. Bourbon aged in a warehouse in Arizona, a cave in Tennessee, or a modern facility in Washington state still counts as bourbon as long as it hits all the federal identity standards. Geography and building type influence flavor, not legality. People conflate quality with location, but the rules don't. So the next time someone claims only Kentucky heat and rickhouses can make true bourbon, just know they're mistaking style for statute. Bourbon's not a regional passport, it's a legal category, not a hometown badge of honor. Bourbon ages in the bottle like wine. That idea keeps hanging around like it's trying to sneak into the science building without a pass. Once bourbon is bottled, its aging process is over. Completely done. The liquid is no longer touching the barrel, which means no more wood interaction, no more evolution in flavor or color. It's frozen in time, preserved like a snapshot of whatever it was when it left the barrel. Wine keeps developing in the bottle because it's chemically active and lower proof. Bourbon's got a much higher alcohol content, and once it's sealed, it's just maintaining. Now, if the bottle's been opened and sits around too long, oxygen can start changing things. That's not aging, that's just slow degradation. It might taste flatter, duller, or slightly different, but it's not maturing in any meaningful sense. So if someone tries to flex about their 20-year-old bottle that's still aging, just nod politely and sip your actual aged bourbon. The years that mattered happened in the barrel, not on the shelf. Anything after that is just bourbon playing statue in a glass suit. Small batch is a regulated guarantee of a tiny number of barrels. That phrase sounds like it came from a dusty government handbook, but in reality, there's no official rule that defines how small a small batch has to be. The term is completely unregulated. Distillers can use it however they want. One brand's small batch might mean 10 barrels. Another might be using hundreds. There's no federal definition, no required range, no oversight. It's marketing language dressed up to sound artisanal. The term usually means the producer selected a group of barrels and blended them for a particular flavor profile. That's it. And it doesn't guarantee quality either. There are excellent small batch bourbons, and there are ones that make you wish you'd poured something else. It all comes down to the producer's standards, not the size of the batch. So if the bottle's bragging about being small batch, just know it could be a handful of barrels, or a few football fields worth. The phrase sounds fancy, but it's got no legal teeth. It's just another label in the wild world of whiskey vocabulary. Single barrel is legally standardized, always exactly one barrel, no exceptions. That would make things so easy. But the term single barrel isn't part of the formal standards of identity for bourbon. It's widely used, sure, but there's no federal law that strictly defines what it has to mean. Most producers do stick to the spirit of it. They bottle bourbon from a single, unique barrel. But technically, the rules don't lay out exact enforcement. It's more of a trust-based system. Some distilleries might dump one barrel into another container to make bottling easier. But as long as it's not mixed with other barrels, it's still single. The idea is to give drinkers something with character, a one-barrel snapshot of flavor. But it's not locked down by the government. It's also worth remembering that single barrel doesn't guarantee the best pour. It just guarantees a unique one. No blending, no averaging. Just one barrel doing its thing. So yes, it usually means what it says. But no, there's no whiskey police force out there making sure every single barrel is following single barrel commandments. Barrel proof, or cask strength, has a strict legal definition. That sounds official, but there's no single federal rule that locks those terms down. The Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau hasn't set a standard definition for them, even though they're slapped on bottles constantly. Instead, they're evaluated on a case-by-case basis. Generally, a barrel proof or cask strength means the bourbon was bottled at or near the proof it came out of the barrel without excessive dilution. But there's no law saying exactly how close it needs to be, or how much proof can change before the term becomes misleading. That creates a wide margin for interpretation. Some brands are super precise, while others stretch the definition a bit. It's more of a handshake agreement between producers and consumers than a locked-in rule. So while these terms usually signal higher alcohol and full flavor, they don't guarantee some legally defined experience. You have to trust the producer's integrity, which is charming and terrifying at the same time. There's power in those words, but no rule book actually backing them. Bottled in bond means undiluted barrel strength. That interpretation is loud and wrong. The Bottled in Bond Act has been around since the 19th century, and it doesn't say anything about bottling at barrel proof. In fact, it requires the opposite. Bottled in bond bourbon has to be bottled at exactly 100 proof, no more, no less. It also has to come from a single distillery, from one distillation season, and be aged in a federally bonded warehouse for at least 4 years. The point of the act was to protect consumers from shady whiskey practices, not to deliver a face-melting proof experience. So if a bottle says bottled in bond, you're getting something consistent, regulated, and traceable, but definitely not full barrel strength. That proof has been adjusted to meet the standard, not left wild. Some people confuse high proof with bottled in bond because both suggest strength and tradition. But legally, they're playing different games. Bonded bourbon is all about trust and transparency, not unleashing raw alcohol fury. If you want uncut power, look for barrel strength. If you want structured, standardized bourbon, bonded is your label. Bottled in bond is just a vibe. There aren't hard requirements. That statement sounds like someone read the label with one eye closed. Bottled in bond isn't just marketing fluff. It's a federally regulated category with specific conditions. The whiskey must be the product of one distillation season and one distiller at a single distillery. It has to be aged in a federally bonded warehouse for at least 4 years and then bottled at exactly 100 proof. Not 99, not 101. There's zero wiggle room. It even has to list the distillery on the label. The law is still on the books and still enforced. It's one of the oldest quality guarantees in American spirits, created back when producers were dumping all sorts of weird additives into whiskey and selling it as the real thing. Bottled in bond was the government's way of saying, this one's not poison. These days, it's less about safety and more about consistency. But make no mistake, it's not a suggestion, it's a checklist. Skip one part and it doesn't qualify. So yeah, bonded bourbon may have style, but the rules are ironclad, not just a marketing mood. Tennessee whiskey isn't bourbon. This one starts arguments faster than an overfilled Glencairn. Technically, Tennessee whiskey meets all the core requirements for bourbon. It's made in the United States, uses a mash bill with at least 51% corn, is distilled under 160 proof, enters the barrel at no more than 125 proof, and is aged in new charred oak. The key difference? Tennessee whiskey goes through the Lincoln County process, which means it's filtered through maple charcoal before aging. That extra step gives it a different flavor profile, and it's also what the state uses to define Tennessee whiskey. But legally speaking, Tennessee whiskey could still qualify as bourbon under federal standards. The reason it's labeled differently is more about branding, tradition, and state pride than federal rejection. Producers in Tennessee usually prefer to label it their way, even if it fits the bourbon criteria. So while it's not marketed as bourbon, it still plays by almost all the same rules. The label may say Tennessee whiskey, but under the hood, it's bourbon with a smoky detour through a charcoal blanket. Like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this.